Welcome, world, to The Thoughtful Bro. Oh my God. Jane Roper, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro. I can't even go into my intro. I'm so excited to have you on the show. Jane Roper, I'm so glad you're here.
I'm so excited to be here. Thank you, Mark.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to try to not get immediately segued into my great love of my guest today, Jane Roper, but I will do my best to stay on script. Here we go. Welcome, everyone, to The Thoughtful Bro. Back after a big hiatus. I had a lot of things going on in the winter, but we're back now for the spring season. Got a ton of guests coming up. And what better way to kick it all off than with the great Jane Roper? The Thoughtful Bro streams every Tuesday at 2, now resuming every Tuesday at 2, to talk about what makes great books tick, what makes great authors tick. A Mighty Blaze, for those who may have been under a rock, started about 3 years ago at the dawn of COVID, where everybody's book tours got canceled, and A Mighty Blaze stepped into the void to say, we will connect authors and readers online. Here we are 3 years later. Jane Roper, our guest today, is one of the original Blaze show hosts and also staff of the Blaze. So that's another reason why we're so excited to have Jane here. At Mighty Blaze, we are never asking for money, but if you want to spend money, please, I recommend you spend it on buzzy satires of cancel culture, viral scandals, social media stardom, and the fixations of the extremely online. Books like The Society of Shame by Jane Roper. The Society of Shame would be a very different kind of book. Anyway, The Society of Shame by Jane Roper. We're going to put many links in the chat to buy it on bookstore.org. If you have questions, put them in the comments. Oh my God, look at that beautiful cover. So cool. If you have questions, put them in the chat and we will get to them in about 30 or 40 minutes. But I would like to introduce our esteemed guest. With no further ado, Jane Roper is the author of 2 previous books, a memoir, Double Time, and a novel, Eden Lake. Her short fiction, essays, and humor have appeared in publications including McSweeney's Internet Tendency, The Millions, The Rumpus, Salon, and Poets and Writers, as well as NPR. Jane is a graduate of the venerable Iowa Writers Workshop and is also, as I mentioned, a member of the OG Mighty Blaze, where she hosted a show called The Zeitgeist. We'll also link to some episodes of The Zeitgeist in the chat. Jane lives in the Boston area with her husband and 2 children. And the reason she's on the show today, as I said, is because she's written a hilarious book, which I think is, if not the smartest, at least the funniest book that I have ever read on cancel culture and social media. It is probably also the smartest book I've ever read on that topic. Fantastic Fiction wrote in a review that The Society of Shame is, quote, a pitch perfect romp through politics and the perils of being extremely online, a timely and witty combination of So You've Been Publicly Shamed and Where'd You Go, Bernadette? And Kirkus, in a starred review, called the book an astutely written with the perfect balance of humor, heartbreak, and understanding, a brilliant satire of internet culture that falls somewhere between, wait for it, the honesty of Me Too and the outrage of Grab 'em by the pussy. Jane, welcome to The Thoughtful Bro.
Thank you. I am so excited to be here. I've been a Thoughtful Bro fan since day one, and I'm a Mark Cecil fan since day minus, I don't know, when did we first meet? Minus
Before
Blaze.
we even met.
Before we even met. Yeah, I'd heard tell of you.
Oh my goodness. All right. Oh my gosh, we already have so many questions and I haven't even finished my intro.
Really?
Yet.
Oh, wow. Cool.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Thank you everybody for showing up today
Yeah.
and asking all these questions. We will get to them all. Jane, this book is hilarious. I had the honor of reading this book years ago. Not even that long ago, really. I mean, you started working on this book, relatively speaking, not that long ago. Maybe 3 years ago, I started seeing some of these first pages. And I just remember being in our workshop and hearing these pages read out loud, and just like the whole class around the table was just in stitches. Like I remember us like not even really being able to get through your pages because like everybody was laughing so hard. So it's of course no surprise to me that it got published. This book is a gift to the world. Everybody needs a good laugh, and frankly, everybody needs. I think the book does so much like reckoning with this crazy moment that we're in, where I think future ages will look back at our age of social media and just think, what were they even doing?
Yeah, what the hell was happening there?
What was that all about? It's just totally out of control. And like, that's what this book is. I mean, I think the setting of this book really is social media. I mean, I think that is like where the book in many ways takes place. So there's so much great stuff to get into, but before I blather on any longer, why don't you just take the stage, Jane, and tell our audience what the Society of Shame is all about?
Sure. Well, the heroine of the Society of Shame is a 47-year-old wife, mother, copy editor, and wife. She's married to a very ambitious politician. She comes home early from a trip one night to find her garage on fire, her husband on the lawn in his underwear, and a passed out young staffer nearby with her panties around her ankles. And a bystander at the scene takes a photo of this, which promptly goes viral, of course. And in the photo, you can see that Kathleen has a giant period stain on her pants. And practically overnight, she becomes the unwitting figurehead of a new social media movement called #YesWeBleed that's about menstrual justice, menstrual destigmatization. And she's sort of a retiring and shy person who shrinks from the spotlight, but she has to figure out how to reckon with her new fame. And she stumbles across something called the Society of Shame, which is a group of other folks who have been humiliated or shamed or canceled. And they sort of guide her forward for better or for worse.
Haven't people learned by now, Jane, to not come home from business trips early?
I know. You never do that. Never, ever do that. I mean, what a recipe. And yeah, don't let your politician's spouse be around young, attractive people all the time.
It's funny, as you were talking about like the garage on fire, it was just like, it's sort of like adjacent to a dumpster fire. It's a dumpster fire of an opening. So what is so interesting about your setup? I mean, like, you can't really start a book in a more interesting, better way. You can't start with more of a bang than that. But, obviously she becomes this kind of reluctant internet like movement leader because of this period stain on her pants. And what's interesting about it is the way that stain becomes, like, to me, a sort of like Rorschach. Oh my God.
Rorschach test.
Rorschach.
A red Rorschach test.
Rorschach test. Excuse me. Say that 10 times fast. For everybody's kind of pet issue. Like, I mean, everybody sort of sees in this stain, as it were, sort of like what is fundamentally wrong with America. Like, there's environmental issues in it, there's feminist issues in it, there's MAGA issues in it, there's gender issues in it, there's trans issues in it. Like, everybody just finds a way to say Cat Held, the name of the main character, is like a manifestation of everything I want to say, like my own, a great talking point for my agenda.
Wow, I never even thought of that, but you're right. I intended that. That was my intention. I really thought it could be a Rorschach test, if you will. It's true. It does end up catapulting a lot of conversations forward about all of those things that you mentioned, and everybody, of course, it being America and it being social media, and everyone has their hot takes on it, and it spawns all kinds of like ridiculous articles and sub movements. And there's the All Blood Matters movement and the Men Bleed Too movement, all kinds of craziness.
And of course, the main hashtag, which I like, occurs in my brain sort of regularly, maybe like once every 6 days or so. Yes, we bleed, is like the main hashtag. And what's so funny about Yes, We Bleed is that this fictional movement, which is spawned by your book, is actually a website that you own, correct?
Yeah, that's right. I'm a whore, a marketing whore in that way. And when I was writing the book, ambitious pain in the ass that I am, I bought yeswebleed.com because I was like, well, but yeah, I just rerouted it to the book's website. I had imaginings of creating this whole like fictional movement website, but then I'm like, I have neither time nor money for that. I should say that it is a hashtag that like has been used, like people, I've seen it, and people have used it when talking about menstrual justice. So it's not like it's the first time it's ever around is in the book, but in the book it becomes this huge thing, obviously, and like this huge rallying cry.
Okay, now I'm going to stay on character here, and you listed me in the acknowledgments as somebody who is very helpful to you, sort of in demonstrating how ignorant men are about periods, which is like one of the great backhanded compliments I've like ever received. But I was helpful to you, pointing out how woefully uninformed the average bro is about these things. But so I'm continuing in that vein now. But I wanted to ask, like you mentioned menstrual justice a moment ago. So for my question is like, is this a real movement? A, and B, like, do you hope, like, how do you imagine or hope that your book would like intersect with this actual movement?
Yeah. Well, first I'll say, I mean, that was a funny conversation with you and the other bros in our writing class that said, when it was that you guys couldn't quite grasp why like the stain on her pants was such a big deal. They're like, oh, it probably happens. And we're like, no, it's so embarrassing. And we're like, and there are all these moments that when women have their periods, like what we're negotiating and navigating. And anyway, that was very funny. But yes, I mean, menstrual justice is a real thing. And actually, I mean, even since I started writing the book, it's become higher profile. There was a short documentary that won an Oscar, I think, for best short documentary called Period End of Sentence. That was about an organization in a movement in India to help make affordable feminine hygiene products for girls, because in a lot of parts of the world, in poorer countries, when girls don't have menstrual supplies, and they are like expensive and hard to get, they don't go to school, right? Or they don't go out because they can't. There's also a lot of like shame and taboos around periods, more so in other I mean, well, in our own culture too, but even more so in other places. So there is more and more discussion around that. There are movements often led by young people, like the young people in the book, around getting free period supplies in school bathrooms. So Kathleen's daughter, Aggie, in the book becomes a real activist, and she and her friends become real activists for this sort of thing. And yeah, it's real. I mean, part of me was afraid. I was like, if this turns into some big, like all out movement, like my book's just going to be obsolete. It's going to be like, oh yeah, right, whatever.
Oh my gosh. All right. So beyond the period aspect of it, I think the great thing about this book is it's just so funny, sort of on the surface, right? But there's a lot of deeper stuff going on here. And I think there's a great quote that gets to the heart of this by our mutual friend, Steve Almond, who blurbed the book. And one of the things he said in his great blurb was, Jane Roper has written a biting satire about, among other things, internet culture and our lust for rubbernecking. But at its heart, The Society of Shame is a serious novel about the search for female identity in middle age. And I have to say, that my second time reading this now, or I don't know how many times I've read it, but like when I read it in workshop versus when I reread it for this show, that jumped out at me so much in a way. Like, I think because the first time you read it through, you're just thinking about how funny it is, and you're just like, what is going to happen next, right? But this time I felt like the book is like truly kind of, or this character Kat is like truly kind of haunted by some of these ideas and this sort of transition she's going through between periods, excuse the pun, of her life. And I know that on your Substack, which is terrific, and we're going to link to Jane's Substack in the chat, but you've written a lot about changes that happen to a woman's body at this stage of life. I mean, she's 47 in this book. Kat Held, her husband, is 49. You talk about mortality on your Substack, and I guess I just wanted to ask you kind of about that, because I think a lot of the real emotional core of this book and kind of some of the deeper chords it's hitting are about this kind of reckoning with a new stage of life.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, and it's no coincidence that, I'm roughly the same age as the protagonist, so I can relate to a lot of this stuff, from the sort of night sweats to the having your kids grow up and transition into adolescence. And, I think for Kathleen in the novel, she's been living in the shadow of a man, and which was never her intent. It just sort of happened that her husband was ambitious, and she sort of let herself take, what am I looking for? Second fiddle isn't the right phrase, but anyway, take a back seat to his, let her career take a back seat to his, sort of on the, having been, she wanted originally to be an author herself, but faced a lot of rejection. So, but there comes a point, right, when all of these choices that you make through your 20s and 30s and your early 40s, whatever, they've accrued. And all of a sudden, I think you reach this point in midlife where you're looking at your body changing, you're looking at your family changing, and you're sort of saying, well, wait a minute, how did I get here? Is this where I want to be? Where do I go next? And especially when you add in the infidelity piece, right? I think there's many times, when men of that age cheat, it's with younger women, and you have women who are, meanwhile you're going through menopause. And it's interesting that you notice that more, because it's actually a thread of the book that I brought out more upon revision and more upon working with my agent and my editor to kind of make that emotional center of the book come out more. And also Kathleen's relationship with her daughter come out more, to really, this is the thing, if you're writing satire, you're writing humor, if it's just all funny, it's hard to get as invested. You can be entertained, but I wanted people to be also invested in the characters and invested in the more serious issues of the book, while they're also hopefully having fun. I mean, it's not, whatever. It's not like Tolstoy, it's not like, but I'm glad.
Thank God. I mean,
right. But I was glad. I really appreciated that blurb from Steve, and that he, felt resonance with the more deeper emotional parts of the book that I tried to put in there.
Yeah. And nothing against Tolstoy. I love Tolstoy, but it's like when you come to, you're not laughing a lot when you're reading Tolstoy.
Yeah.
I was laughing a lot when I was reading this, and I need a laugh these days. Let's talk about her husband, right? You mentioned him. This is in many ways also a portrait of a marriage, which is probably a situation, sadly, that a lot of people can relate to, where the two partners in the marriage have sort of grown apart slightly or gone in different directions. And certainly Kat is sort of drifting, and Bill is sort of awakening to this new calling that he didn't quite have before. And so they're just sort of drifting apart. And one of the things that I thought was interesting is the way you talk about Bill as a narcissist. And I don't know, I just wanted to talk about that just for a second, because I read a super interesting quote on yesterday, I guess, when I was reading this book. And it's by this guy, Mark Manson, who wrote The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck. And he has a newsletter that comes out on Monday. And he said, the way to tell the difference between narcissism and confidence is to see how it affects other people. Narcissism, by definition, needs to diminish others, while confidence gives comfort and security to other people. And anyway, I just was curious about, Bill's narcissism. And I guess to make that question slightly broader, if you see what he did in this affair and the way he's behaving in the book as sort of symptomatic of the male version of sort of what Kat is going through.
Yeah. Oh gosh. Wow. That's a deep question. I don't see Bill as a narcissist in the sense of sort of a malignant narcissistic personality disorder sort. I'm very familiar with that, and that's not Bill. But I think you're right, that he finds this, he gets into this groove of realizing, wow, I'm a really talented politician, and I'm really good at this. And he starts to get high off that power and off that success that he's having. And I don't know, I'm not a dude, but my sense is, from my observations of dudes, is that the idea, power is very much still a part of what men think is expected of them, and power, influence. So I think for some men, I think for maybe all people, not just men, but once you start to feel that, it's kind of addictive, right? And once you start experiencing then that, it kind of is one thing. Well, if I'm doing really well and I'm really powerful and charismatic and everything, I should have a cool car. So he buys this vintage car that ends up catching on fire. It's and I should probably be screwing younger women, because I can, right? They're attracted to him because of his charisma and his success and his power. There's
his bald spot. And his bald
And
spot.
his cute bald spot. It's just, it just gives, he has to have a little flaw. He's not perfect. He's got a little like sexy dad thing going on. But yeah, I mean, I was and I think that trying to show that sort of, wow, he's up here and she's feeling like I'm down here. Like, wow, how did I get so far down here? And he's like just going on, he's rocketing up to the moon. And then suddenly she's like, when she's thrust into the limelight, and at first she resists, but then she's kind of like, well, why shouldn't I rocket up to the moon too? Damn it. Well, and she has other people sort of convince her of that. Like, why don't you take advantage of this? See, like, get a taste of what Bill's tasting. Get a taste of that drink and see what you do with it, and see how it affects your life. And drink me on the bottle. And she drinks.
And so she goes and does reluctantly or not, takes up this mantle. And she enters this world of both, she's in the Society of Shame, which is an actual group of people that helps canceled people deal with being publicly shamed. And then also a lot of her story carries out on screens. And a lot of kind of the odyssey she makes is sort of this kind of Homeric odyssey through all different kinds of screens and social media platforms. And I think that anybody who read this would say that you are at your sharpest when you are mimicking the insane world of our social media. You have a gift. You have a gift for making up like fake memes, fake hashtags, fake comments. I mean, it's just, every time there's some like interstitial with like a TV show or a Twitter thread or something, it's just, I'm like, can't wait for this. I just want to like, there was like so many moments you could like literally open this book to a random page and find something hilarious. There was like this meme about that immediately occurs of like a Statue of Liberty holding a tampon like with her face on it. I mean, there was like this Twitter thread, like people are like sort of coming to her support, and like I love this exchange. So a hashtag, I mean, a handle called No Period Shaming says, if you cough while you're peeling off your pad,
phrases you never thought you would read on the Thoughtful Bro.
If you cough while you're peeling off your pad or dropping it in the waste bin in a public bathroom so your stall neighbors won't hear, you're part of the problem. And then another person responds, another supporter says, I'm 19 and I'm totally regretting all the times I scrubbed the blood out of my underwear like it was a stain instead of a gift. I mean, and it's just like on and on and on and on. It's terrific. And there's also like sort of like more profound, kind of like also hilarious, but little quips. Like this one is towards the end of the book. Quote, if someone, this is the narrator speaking, if someone shames you on an internet think piece, but you don't read it, have you still been shamed? I love it so much. I love everything you're doing there. And it got me thinking, because I'm a thoughtful bro. I like to think about what activates writers. And I was trying to think like, why is Jane so good at this? And like, why does she want to be good at it? And so on. And I know I've seen you say in an interview that you did that you just love social media, but to begin this part of the conversation, let's just have you characterize the word love in that context. Like, do you love it like you love looking at a train wreck? Do you love it like you love comfort food? Do you love it like an addictive show? Like, how do you love social media?
Let me count the ways. I mean, a lot. That's a good question, because it's not like social media is wonderful and perfect and it's so great. I mean, the sincere way I love it, right, is the fact that it's like kept me connected and reconnected to people from all parts of my life, and helped me meet and connect with new people, with strangers, with folks, like by doing a Mighty Blaze and all of that. And I love the way I can sort of, you feel like you're at a party sometimes and you're tapping into this over here and this over here. You feel informed, you feel connected. But yeah, I also love, I guess you could call it that, love, hate, what it reveals about human nature, and the way it warps human nature in a way, I think, like, or it brings out certain aspects of it. It brings out this rubbernecking, looking at a car crash thing. It brings out this ability to feel good about yourself by trashing someone else, or by, I'm going to retweet this little activist thing. So therefore I have done something good and important in the world. And I mean, I do this too, you know, I'm not like excusing myself. But there's so many, gosh, it's like this prism of human flaws, and it's like the best and worst of humanity all distilled and intensified in this like super intense manic space where insane things happen. And yeah, I just, as a writer, it feels so ripe, it has always felt so ripe to me for mining and mocking and penetrating. And it also, what I think is interesting and dangerous about social media is that there's very little room for nuance and subtlety, which anyone who's ever tried to have like a political conversation with anyone on Facebook or elsewhere knows. You can't, it's very rare to be able to have a nuanced conversation. So social media tends to flatten people and flatten ideas. And I think that's really toxic and really dangerous. And that was one of the things that I wanted to expose and hold a mirror up to, in a way, the way that, especially I think when people are shamed online, whether or not, you know, they may fully deserve it, but they also sort of are denied their humanity in the process.
Great answer.
That was a long answer. Sorry.
That was a great answer. I totally agree. I mean, there seems to be some good that social media has, based on all that you said, but also, I mean, even its most devoted users call it like a hell site. I mean, I'm speaking of like Twitter. I mean, it's just this pure fire hose of sewage a lot of the time. And I guess one way I'm curious to get your answer this way about social media. You have 2 children. I assume they have phones.
They have what?
Phones.
Oh, phone. I thought you said they have films. I'm like, no, not yet. They haven't made films yet. But yeah, they have phones. Yes.
All children have films these days.
Yeah.
But so they have phones. They must have social media on some level. Here's what I want to, like, where I'm going to really probe what you really think about social media. What do you tell your children about it, about how to use it? Do you police how they use it at all? How do you talk about social media to them?
Well, yeah, so they both do use social media, and although in different ways. So our kiddo Elm uses TikTok a lot, but also like Discord, and but it's really, for them, it's about connecting with a very specific community of people. And then for our other kiddo, Cleo, she's more about Instagram and photos of friends, and so they do use it differently. But we've talked a lot about, with them, about some of what I just said, the way things get flattened, right? So that if you make a comment or someone makes a comment about you, what it looks like on the screen may be very different from what the intended meaning is. And you have to just take that with a grain of salt. Also, you can't let it become your whole world, right? If you feel like, I mean, which goes back to that, if this happens and you don't read it, did it actually happen? Or like, if someone is shaming you online, but you're not even paying attention, are you shamed? Do you feel shame? So it's like, if you want to live in that world all the time, and shutting out the rest of the world, you're going to lose perspective. And so that's something I think we talked with our kids a lot about. Just don't make this your whole world. This can be part of your world. It's sort of inevitable. I mean, we tried to hold it off for as long as possible, but it needs to be just one piece, and you need to be spending time with friends in person, and you need to be reading things that aren't, online, and you need to be going outside. There have to be healthy boundaries around it. Otherwise, you just get sucked into it completely. And that's kind of what happens to Kathleen, right? Kathleen in the book loses sight of, she becomes so focused on what people are saying about her online, and, sort of where she is in public favor, that she loses sight of reality, or offline reality. She loses sight of her relationship with her daughter and some of her core values and who she is and what matters to her. And that is definitely one of the dangers of being extremely online, as the young folk say.
One thing I like to do when I talk to a writer is figure out why they were so inspired to write this book. Why, like, the things that any writer is really good at, and this is one of the things that you're really good at, is writing about social media. And I try to think, like, why is she so good at it? Now, I have the advantage in this case, of knowing you really well. And you're a good friend of mine. We talk all the time. So I just know you in a different way than I would know another author who I know mainly through their work. But I know, and I hope this isn't a spoiler or something you wouldn't mind being shared, but I think you are somebody who is passionately committed to certain political ideals. I mean, I think you are somebody who is, I'll let you characterize yourself, whether you're an activist or not. You feel, certainly compared to me, you feel like an activist on the political issues that you care about. And I was wondering, like, why was Jane so good at this, and B, like, to write a novel, you have to have like a sustained interest in something. It has to really kind of aggravate you or boggle you if you commit to writing a whole novel about something. And here's my theory about this book. I think that you genuinely care about a number of political issues. And what you see on social media is a kind of performative activism, a shallow virtue signaling that passes for activism, something that is like sort of this Taylor Swift line comes to mind. My covert narcissism, like disguised as altruism, is I think what Taylor Swift says. But it's like, what I mean by that is, people just sort of like, hey, I'm going to like post on Twitter today and feel good about myself as an activist human being for the rest of the week. I've done it now. I too am an activist, right? And I feel like that probably bothers you in a particular way because I think you actually care about these issues. What do you think?
Well, I do care about these issues. Yes. I mean, certain issues. And thank you for that. Yeah, it does bother me that, that there's a lot of talk and I think little action from a lot of people who are doing a lot of the talking or the posting or the sharing without backing it up by actually, putting their time or their money or their attention on the line, or having some of the conversations in real life in harder ways and more real ways. So I think definitely the rancor of, things just, I mean, there'd been political rancor showing up on social media for years, but really when Trump was elected in 2016 and everything just kind of went bonkers, and I certainly count myself as liberal, but I also, I believe that there are many situations where there is possibility for like empathy and for productive conversations with people who don't necessarily feel the same way. I think there's some situations where there's not room for that. And I think in general, social media is not a good place to have those conversations. But I used to try to have those conversations online and it just never worked. Cause like I could start in a good place of being like, oh, well, okay, I can understand where you're coming from. And here's another way of looking at it. And then they're like, libtard bitch, blah, 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 or on the contrary, I'm like, I start like seeing red and getting upset and being like, oh, why? And it just made me realize like how, I don't know, just how toxic and harmful trying to have these nuanced conversations is online, and yet how we are all addicted to it and can't look away from it. But one of the things I found and still do find most troubling about it is just how immediate people are how quick people are to just sort of classify folks. Like, if you say this, you must be this. If you say this, you must be this. And there's no in between. There's no gray area. There's no needing to take the time to stop and understand, well, why are you saying that? Or are you at this point in your journey, but maybe you could make it to this point further along? Like, I feel like with a lot of issues, especially like around race, like I'm constantly learning and still learning. And when I look back on things I used to say, or think or do, I'm like, oh God, that's awful. But it's an ongoing process, and it feels like sometimes on social media, people there's no room to give people the grace of like, wow, that really sucked what you said, what you just said, or what you just said is wrongheaded in a lot of ways. So like you have the choice, right? Am I gonna sort of go into it and try to like help you along your journey, or am I going to go in and just like shoot you down and tell you you're a bad person? Yeah, it's God, it's so complicated. And this is why it's complicated. I'm sort of like struggling a little to articulate it because it's so thorny and because it's something I think about a lot and I see the damage it does.
I think another aspect of this book, which is so interesting, building on what you just said and how there's sort of no room for error. And if you make the slightest, betray the slightest sign of ideological impurity, even to people who, almost every other case would be your political ally, everybody must get stoned. And I think like one of the other really interesting aspects of this book is knowing that you are liberal and care deeply about liberal issues. A lot of this is also a send up of liberals and the way like the circular firing squad and all the like ideological litmus tests that happen online. And I just thought it was really kind of interesting and dangerous and risky for you to kind of not take what to you would be the low hanging fruit of, aiming at somebody who's sort of across the ideological aisle from you.
Yeah, that's easy.
Right. It's easy and it's been done and it's just so obvious. Right. But you're just sort of looking around like in the liberal circles and like, guys, like look at how you're behaving. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, liberal infighting does drive me bonkers. Like, and I'm sure this probably marks me as old, right? I'm sure like some younger, like super progressive people would be like, whatever, they're revolution or die, right? But I get really frustrated between centrists and progressives and I sort of fall somewhere in between those two bits of liberalism, I think. So it was very easy and fun to make fun of that sort of infighting, the like Bernie versus Hillary people going. I don't mention either of them specifically, I don't think, but I kind of try to capture that spirit of like, yeah. And meanwhile, the conservatives are sitting there like, yes, keep fighting. But I did have fun. I made a little fun of the right as well. But
everybody got a little something.
Everybody got a little something. Yeah. I love it.
But anyway, it's terrific, and it adds to what's so fresh about the book. And frankly, I think it was a risk for you. I mean, to kind of give your own a little bit of a ribbing, I think was a bit of a risk, and I think it also allowed you to be super sharp and subtle about it because you kind of know those issues and that behavior inside and out. All right, there are bordering on a record number of questions right now for this esteemed author, and I will get to those in a moment. But for the last part of the interview coming from me, I want to talk a little bit about your writing journey to get here, because it's very, very interesting. And I know a lot of writers and aspiring writers and creative people watch this show. And I think Jane's story is terrific and instructive and inspiring in a number of ways. But to attempt to segue, Kat in this book has, as you mentioned earlier in the interview, abandoned her writing dreams or sort of put them on the back burner. And the book is in some ways, I mean, there's like a lot of threads in this book, but one of them is sort of like her odyssey as a writer and kind of all the ups and downs of trying to be a writer. And I just, first of all, want to start with asking you, like, was your own odyssey as a writer sort of directly feeding your portrayal of Kat's?
Yes and no. I mean, the thing with Kat is that, or Kathleen, depending on where in the book you are, is that she faces rejection and she in the early part of her ambition, and then she just gives up. She just says, screw it. I can't handle this pain and this rejection. I'm not going to keep going. Whereas I am a glutton for punishment, and I have kept going for years and years and years. Like I haven't let the rejection and disappointment I faced along the way destroy me permanently. Temporarily it destroys me, but then like I've managed to bounce back somehow or other, and this book is an example of that. So I had, as you know, prior to the Society of Shame, I had written another novel that I worked on for 5 years. It incorporated our family's journey with our daughter's cancer. It was about gentrification and drug addiction. It was like heavy shit. And I think it was good, but my agent was not able to sell it. And when that was done, when I sort of realized that was it, I was just, I basically said to myself, I was like, I'm not going to spend 5 years on a novel again. And I have to do something completely different. Like if I keep doing this, and I had rejection with other similar kind of things, I'm like, that's the definition of insanity, to do things differently and expect a different result. So and for years, people had been telling me, my husband particularly, telling me, like, you write funny nonfiction, right? I've been blogging forever. My memoirs kind of humorous. It's like, why don't you bring that to your fiction? And I'm like, I don't know how, or like, I have serious things to say. But I think, yeah, after that last novel got rejected everywhere, and I was just kind of at the end of my rope, I'm like, fuck it. I'm just going to see if I'm going to go crazy. I'm going to go way out there. So I started, that with that opening chapter just being completely absurd, to kind of give myself permission to just kind of go nuts. And I had so much more fun writing this book than I had ever had, writing anything else in my life.
And I think within our friend group, there's a number of people who have a similar story, and this kind of, and I would include myself among them. I mean, people who are very serious and more importantly, self-serious about literature. Because I think you'd be very serious about literature and write the kind of books that you and I write, but self-serious, right? And just sort of like the New Yorker and the literary canon, and you get to a point where you're just like, I just don't give an F, and I'm just gonna do this. And I think the IDGAF novel is a thing.
Was I not supposed to swear? You're all not.
I'm just, I guess I swear on this show, but today I'm just in a wholesome mood, I guess.
Okay.
talking about periods, as one is. Anyway, but the IDGA fuck novel is I think it's a thing. And the question I want to ask you on this before we move on to one last thing is, you went to the Iowa Writers Workshop, which is the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I'm wondering what the Iowa Writers Workshop Jane would have thought of this book.
Oh, that's a great question. She probably would have really enjoyed reading it. But she probably, gosh, I don't know. I mean, she probably would have thought, like, well, but what about winning prizes? Like, what about, don't you want to be like, try to win the National Book Award or something? Or, this isn't Ian McEwan. This isn't, I don't know, whoever. So I think she would have been surprised by it. I think me back then thought I was going in a very different direction, which was ironic because I was writing funny things back then, but they weren't in my fiction.
Well, what's so interesting about that comment you just made is that one of my favorite novels of the last few years, and I know for a fact when I first encountered your book and gave you some feedback on it, like the first novel that I brought up was Paul Beatty's The Sellout.
Yeah.
Right. And like that's a satire about race. This is a satire about feminism and women's issues. And I mean, I think that comparison totally holds up. Mm-hmm. And that book won like every award. And your book, we shall see, but I have a good feeling. I mean, I think satire is an incredibly subtle, intellectual, and work kind of art. And, some of the most ambitious works of art we have are satires.
Yeah. I mean, I think people should take satire seriously. We need it. I mean, like Catch-22 and like Vonnegut, and it's important. It's important stuff. I think people do it with varying degrees of intellectual weight, and I do think, like, yes, I think my work has intellectual weight, but it may be on the slightly sillier side. But that's okay.
Totally okay. It's totally okay. Last question for me. I promised that would be my last question, but one more is that we folks in the audience, Jane and I, share an editor at Anchor Books, and her name is Anna Kaufman. My book is coming out a year from now, but Anna bought Jane's book about a year before she bought my book. And so here's my question about Anna Kaufman to you, Jane, is I think we both totally agree unambiguously that she is an amazing editor. And I will go first and just say, for me, like the question to you is, what makes her so great? And I would just say, let me count the ways, but to pick one, she has this way with my book and editing me of like sort of suggesting things in this way that's like totally like self-effacing, like, oh, I don't know, like am I crazy? Like, you might try that, but you don't have to. I mean, it's great as it is, but just think about it if you want. And like everything is like ultra qualified. Like, you don't have to do it. Just forget I even said anything. But it's like you always end up doing it. And it's like it always ends up feeling like it's your idea and it just came from you and she didn't pressure you, but she's right. So I just love that aspect of her style.
Yeah, she's great. And she makes it fun and funny and entertaining. And yeah, I remember when you looked at some of the comments she had made on my work, you're like, you're gonna have a blast going through these comments. Yeah. I think what I think makes her really good is she understands intent and she edits toward your intent. That's like, this is what you're trying. I see what you're trying to do. I see what you want to get across here. Here's maybe a different way to try it or a different way to come at it. Or here's why it's not working, but never like, like you're doing A and she wants you to do like Q. Yes. You know, she and I think good readers in general do that. And if you're in a good workshop with good people, they're not trying to remake your book in their own image. They look at, okay, here I can see what you're trying to do. Think about how you can do this better.
Yes. And thank you, Kimberly, our fanner, for putting that quote up there. That is an epically great quote. She edits toward intent. I love that. I've never quite heard it said like that, but she totally does that. And I just love that as a great editor quality. Okay, now that is truly it for me. Let's move to the audience and take some of these questions. Kimberly, why don't you just throw a couple on screen here? One at a time. So Anissa, hi Anissa, great to have you on the show as always. Our Blaze super fan, Anissa. Did you start with character, setting, or plot?
I think probably it was sort of character and plot intertwined, right? I knew I wanted someone to become internet famous and in a way that was sort of humiliating or embarrassing, and I knew I had to do it to a character who, like, for her, it would be the worst possible thing, like someone who just the last thing they could want or handle would be that sort of thing. So Kathleen quickly came to mind as the character I could do this to. So those things. As for setting, I mean, it's set in an affluent, like Westchester County, made up Westchester County town. And that was really more for the sake of convenience, but it does set up this thing about sort of privilege and propriety that I think makes a good backdrop. I also had to have it be near New York.
Okay. Great. All right, let's try another.
I know well because I grew up near there. So.
Totally. All right, let's try another question. Okay, who has been, this is from Licha or Leica Haney. Thank you. I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing your name wrong. Who has been your hardest character to write about and why?
That's a good one. I mean, I think in some ways, Bill, the cat's husband, was a little tricky to write about because obviously he's like a bad guy in the book, but I also didn't want him to be a monster. So he had to have some moments of humanity and humility. Otherwise it would just be, you know, he'd be a cartoon villain. And I mean, you could argue maybe he is, and maybe he's a little flat as a character, but trying to give him enough nuance that he seemed human. That's hard. That's hard when you have someone who does something bad and is sort of the bad guy to also make them human.
Yeah, I mean, as a guy, I will weigh in and say he didn't seem flat at all, and he seemed like it was a very crisp portrait, I thought, of somebody who, frankly, is just a lot like Kat, like sort of like we're all lost, but lost in our own ways, you know. And he is just sort of lost in his own way, and when you're lost, you hurt people sort of inadvertently. And anyway, that's just, he's on his own ride in that way.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
Yeah. Okay, let's do a few more. These are great questions. The legendary Caroline Levitt. Jane, also, if you were not a novelist, what would you be doing?
Oh God, I don't know. I'd be just a malcontent copywriter. That's my day job, is I do copywriting and stuff, but I like it. But okay, but say if I were doing something I actually liked, if I were not a novelist, a screenwriter. A lame answer. I don't know. I feel like I'd have to be doing something involving stories. Maybe I'd be an actor. I don't know.
I think this would make a great series, by the way.
Me too. Tell that to somebody in power. I love that.
And Caroline had another question, which was like somewhere else in the thread here, where she said, "What are you obsessed with now, and why?"
Oh wow. So I do have another book that I'm thinking about that's baking, and so one of the things that's obsessing me about that book is how we escape sort of layers of built up resentment over time. So I have some characters who have a lot of pain going back really, really deep, layers of complexity and jealousy and stuff like dating back to when they were teenagers. And I'm just curious about how people can get past that sort of stuff and kind of amazed by how deep rooted things from our youth can be. So I'm planning on mining that quite a bit in my next
Wait,
work.
but will it be funny, or is it
Yes.
another serious?
Oh no,
Okay.
I'll try. I'll make it funny. I'll make it funny.
Good.
I promise.
Thank you.
It might not be quite as satirical as
Yeah.
Society of Shame, but I tend to make it funny.
Well, your fans have expectations now, Jane. So, all right. So this is from Darlene. Hello, Darlene. Eager to hear about the swan.
Oh, yes. Okay, the swan on the cover. Thank you for asking that, Darlene, because the swan on the cover was a total surprise to me when I saw it. Like when I saw the cover designs, I was like, whoa. Because there are swans in the book. They don't play a major role, but they do appear. But I think, the swan, I think what the designer did, Vian Nguyen is her name, and she's brilliant. That was so genius, is like the swan becomes a symbol for the main character, right? Who's sort of an ugly duckling who becomes a swan, but also swans, we associate them with like pride and swanning around. But there's the swan with their sunglasses on, sort of hiding in shame, with all their beautiful plumage. So I think it works beautifully as sort of a symbol of the book. And I love it. I freaking love it.
It's so great. It's so great. Okay. And there's also a hilarious video of Jane online on her Instagram that you can see of her walking through a park with a giant version of that cover and then being accosted by what appears to be a mobster.
Yeah, that was insane. I went to with Jenna Blum, Blaze Master Extraordinaire, went to the public garden in Boston because it has the swan boat. So we want to take some pictures of the swan boats, but we happened upon some characters. Yeah, that was nuts. A guy who claimed to be an extra and a authenticity consultant in gangster movies, who we pretty sure was full of shit. Yeah, that was crazy.
All right, let's do one more question, if we could. Trisha Blanchett, author of Herrick's End and Herrick's Lie, two great books.
Excellent books, highly recommend.
Yes, called the Neath Trilogy, very imaginative fantasy series about Boston, and Trisha's second book in that series, Herrick's Lie, just came out. But Trisha asks, how long did the book take to write, and how many versions did it go through?
I wrote this book for me really fast. I wrote like a draft in about a year, which for me is like lightning speed. And then I spent probably another 6 months sort of revising it. So I don't know. I can't say that there was a definitive like this version, this version, this version. There were sort of half versions and real version. And so, but start to finish, I'd say it was like an 18-month process. But by the time I got to like, I know it's so fast, right? I mean, that doesn't count then edits with, with Anna and everything. But to the point at which we sold it, it was about 18 months. I don't know if I can ever do that again. That was just something happened.
Yeah, it's probably, but there was, probably a lot of gas kind of building up in one of your tanks after that 5-year ordeal you've just gone through, and you were just like, fuck it.
Like I said, I was like, I'm never going to spend that long unless I like have a deal already, or I know, because we're all writing, not all of us, but most of us are like writing on spec. We have no idea if our book is going to get published. So you have to ask yourself, like, how much time and energy am I going to sink into this with the knowledge that it may never see the light of day? And that decision is different for every person at every different juncture, I think, in their writing life.
Right. All right. Well, we're going to wrap there. This has been terrific, Jane. This book is wonderful. I also will say, other than the award-winning, like swept all the awards, the Sellout, I think this book is just totally fresh and there's nothing else like it out there. And if the only other thing out there I can think of that's like this is a book that was a bestseller and won all these awards, I think that's a pretty good sign. I love satire. I love this book. This book is a lot smarter than I am, but even I could enjoy it, even though it was sort of above me.
Yeah, it's a little hard for you. Yeah.
It was hard for me, but there was a lot for me to enjoy anyway. Okay, I'm going to end the interview as I always end my interviews, asking you the thoughtful bro question, which is: imagine the ideal reader for the Society of Shame, somebody who's getting all your jokes, unlike me, somebody who's smarter than me, and who is just totally is receiving the book in just the way you wished it would be received. This person finishes the book, puts it down, looks out the window, and describe for me in a word or phrase, what is the feeling that this reader has?
You know, this is going to sound very sincere and mushy for like a funny book, but I hope they just feel like people are probably a little better than I think they are. I don't know. Like, I just hope they have a sense of like just mercy or forgiveness or something. I don't know. Just a sense that like we're all just trying as hard as we can to do right by each other and by the world. And I don't know.
I love that. I love that answer. You want to know why? Because it's such a hittable goal, but such an important goal. It's sort of like, I'm not going to give, this isn't going to be like, I'm not going to take you from a 5 to an 11, but it's so important that this book just moves you up from a 5 to a 6. You know what I mean? It just fills you with humanity, brings you up in this very kind of measurable, solid way.
Well, and I hope they take that with them the next time they're on social media, I guess.
Ooh.
Like that's where I want them to take that feeling. Like next time I'm online, I'm going to keep that in mind. So.
How do you do that, by the way? But like, sorry to ask you one more question. Like, if the blaze, so to speak, online is just burning hot and you're basically dealing with like a 5-alarm fire and it's like the planes are dropping the water from over the forest, right? And you walk in there and you're like, guys, let's just chill out. I mean, I don't let's be civil or humane. Like, how do you, in a practical way, sort of bring the temperature down or be humane?
I mean, a lot of times I just have to not post something. Like will be so tempted to comment on someone's thing. And I just have to like, be like, Jane, do you want to put your energy, your emotional energy and time here? Make a smart decision, you know? And that's harder to make those decisions sometimes than other times. But I think restraint can be a good thing.
Oh, thank you, Jane. I love that message to end on. Folks, the book is called The Society of Shame. It is by Jane Roper. She's hilarious. Go read her other stuff on McSweeney's and on her subscribe to her Substack. It's great. It's just like the book. It's like totally heartfelt and getting into deep issues, but also very funny. Jane, thank you for being on the show, especially on your pub day. I and everybody at the Blaze is so freaking fucking happy for you.
Thank you so much, Mark. I cannot think of a better way to kick off the tour of shame. So thank you so much. This was awesome. Thank you so much, Mark. And thank you to everyone out there. And thank you to the Blaze. I love you guys.
Okay. Bye, everybody. We'll see you next week on Thoughtful Bro. And please enjoy other shows on A Mighty Blaze.